All right, good afternoon, students. So we are at Thursday of August 27th of 2020, the craziest year ever. And we happened to get lucky with that storm, Hurricane Laura. I know that some people in Texas did not get lucky, Orange and a few other cities, but the majority of us, it was a lot less of an impact than it was expected to be, so that's good. However, not so good for people in Louisiana, so let's be thinking about them and trying to figure out ways to assist with their losses. Today we're going to pick up on I Survived Hurricane Katrina, 2005. So of course we know Hurricane Katrina did happen in New Orleans, Louisiana. Hurricane Laura was the majority of the destruction also happened in Louisiana again. It was nothing compared to, it was a ton, but the fatality loss was nothing like Katrina was. So that's a blessing. All right, so Chapter 7. In Chapter 6, they had started to evacuate, and it had taken them 2 hours to go about 10 feet in their vehicle, and then the little sister Cleo had gotten really sick, so they had to head back home, remember? And the mom, when she gets nervous, she bakes, so they had a lot of baked goods in the car with them. They tried to go see Uncle Dave, I think was his name, the dad's best friend, and he said he was staying and he was opening up his bar for people to stay if they wanted to stay as well. All right, so Chapter 7. Cleo threw up all day. Barry tried to help keep her calm, but even he couldn't get her to stop crying. And remember, Barry is very close to Cleo, and he's usually good at getting her to calm down. Mom managed to talk to their doctor, who had evacuated to Baton Rouge. He said there was a bad flu going around, and Cleo wouldn't start to feel better for at least another day. Mom and Dad talked about going to the Superdome, but the newscaster on TV said there were already 10,000 people at the football stadium, with thousands more lined up around the building. "We're hearing there is not enough food or water at the dome," the newscaster said, "and if the power goes off, it's going to be like an oven in there." Then they showed a man who had been turned away because he wanted to bring his little dog with him. "They say no pets," the man said, holding the dog up to the camera, "but I can't leave this guy all by himself." Looking at those crowds on television, Barry was relieved when Mom and Dad decided they were better off at home. Throughout the afternoon, Barry kept his eyes on the sky. By 6 o'clock, the wind had kicked up. The sky turned gray with streaks of silver. But the strangest thing was the silence. Their block was deserted. There were no motorcycles vrooming, no kids laughing and shouting, no music playing or basketballs bouncing. Usually the trees were filled with birds and frogs chirped from the bushes, but there wasn't a bird in sight, and not a peep was to be heard. And then, around 10 o'clock that night, the wind and rain started for real. Dad and Barry were settled on the living room couch. The baseball playoffs were on, and Dad had set them up with a feast of chips, salsa, and sodas. Mom and Cleo were fast asleep in Mom and Dad's room. The wind moaned at first, then it started to howl, and finally it was shrieking so loudly Dad had to turn up the TV. Barry moved closer to Dad. Soon there were other noises. Pum, pum, pum. "That's just the rain banging against the metal roof on the shed," Dad said. Kabang! Whoops! A gutter came loose. Cha-chong! There goes part of someone's fence. Dad sat there calmly, watching the game, munching on chips. Barry remembered their plane ride to New York the past summer. An hour into the flight, they had flown into a thunderstorm. How that airplane bounced up and down. It felt like a giant hand was dribbling the plane like a basketball. Flashes of lightning exploded in the sky. A woman sitting across from Barry burst into tears. The pilot made everyone sit down, even the stewardesses. The plane rattled so badly, Barry was sure one of the wings would fall off. And in all that commotion, Dad had just sat there, reading his book. A few times he had patted Barry's leg. "Quite a ride," he had said, never taking his eyes from the book, never once looking outside at the lightning or craning his neck to see the scared expressions on the stewardesses' faces. So Barry had kept his eyes glued to Dad's face. As long as Dad was calm, he decided he didn't have to worry. Finally, the bouncing stopped. The plane flew out of the clouds and into the clear blue sky. Later, when they were in a taxi heading into the city, Barry asked Dad how he had stayed so calm. "What were you thinking about?" "Blueberry Hill." Barry gave Dad a funny look. When I get nervous, I play the song Blueberry Hill in my mind. Barry knew the song. It was a hit by Fats Domino, the most famous citizen of the Lower Nine. Fats had struck it rich, singing songs way before Dad was born, but he never moved out of the neighborhood. Barry and Jay loved to walk by his bright yellow house. Sometimes Fats was out on his porch to wave hello. Barry watched Dad now as the wind howled and moaned and shrieked. "Hey, Dad," Barry said, "are you playing Blueberry Hill in your mind?" Dad laughed. He put his arm around Barry and pulled him close. "Nah, I was thinking that wind is making a pretty song." "Sounds like wolves," Barry said. "Nah," Dad said. "Ghosts?" Barry said. "Don't think so," Dad said, listening more closely, tilting his head and half closing his eyes. Dad clicked off the TV. He reached over and grabbed his trumpet, which he always kept nearby. The wind shrieked a high note. Dad put his trumpet to his lips and played along. The wind shifted lower, and so did Dad. He played softly, along with the wind, until, after a while, that wind didn't seem so scary, and it actually sounded like a song. Not as pretty as Blueberry Hill, but still a song. Barry almost smiled, imagining Cleo's big fat lady in the sky. Not a vampire, but a pretty singer, belting out her song. And remember, the lady in the sky was Hurricane Katrina, because Cleo had thought it was an actual person that came and took her dollhouse. I think it was some sort of little house. And Barry told her it was just some lady in the sky. And now he's saying that she's not a vampire, like he said before, but a pretty singer belting out her song. The house shook and rattled, but as Dad's music filled the air, Barry started to feel safe. The lights were bright. Mom and Cleo were cozy in bed. He thought of Gramps patting the walls of the house. In a few hours, the sky would turn blue again. Barry had planned to stay up with Dad, to help him keep an eye out for leaks, to watch over Cleo and Mom. But now he felt tired. All the late nights he'd stayed up working on Akivo, and all today he'd been so worried about Cleo. Maybe he could take a little rest, cat nap like Mom did after dinner, before she started her hours of baking. Barry closed his eyes, drifting, 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 and then his eyes popped open. It took Barry a minute to understand that he had fallen asleep. The room was dark except for the flickering light of a candle on the corner table. The power must have gone out. He squinted at his watch. 6:35? It was morning? He had slept for hours? And what had woken him up? A noise? Not the wind, which was still shrieking and moaning. Not the rain, which hammered down even harder than when Barry had closed his eyes. No. There was a new noise out there, a kind of whooshing sound. Barry sat up. Dad's coffee mug, half empty, sat on the floor. Where was Dad? Was Cleo okay? And what was that strange noise that had woken Barry up? Barry heard Dad's footsteps upstairs. He stood up, but before he could take 2 steps, the front door flew open. A wave of water swept into the house. It swirled around Barry's legs, knocking him off his feet. There was a scream, but this time it wasn't the wind. It was Barry. So that's pretty scary. So the door was just flung open by a stream of water that came rushing in so hard that it knocked Barry off his feet. And that's what he woke up to. And so his dad, obviously, during stressful times, he wants to do something to make other people calm. So on the plane, he just remained calm himself and tried to make it seem like it wasn't as big of a deal. At home, he played music. He made the wind into music. He did what he knew how to do, which was play music and make something beautiful. And so that's what he did to try and help his son calm down and probably help himself calm down. And so right now we're at the scary part. Can you imagine? This is real life. This happened to so many people in New Orleans in 2005. So many kids, adults, elderly, babies. It was a very scary time. Chapter 8. Barry! Dad was pounding down the stairs. He splashed through the water, grabbed Barry by the arm, lifting him up and pulled him toward the staircase. Furniture and other objects floated around them like bath toys. The new couch Mom had saved for a year to buy, the little square lamp table where Gramps used to play chess, framed pictures of Barry and Cleo from school. The water was rising fast. It was up to Barry's waist by the time they reached the stairs, and it kept getting higher. It was like their house was a bucket being filled up by the biggest hose in the world. Where was all this water coming from? The water in Gramps' stories hadn't been this wild. Mom burst out of her room with Cleo in her arms as Dad and Barry made it to the top of the staircase. She looked down the stairs and gasped. She wrapped her free arm around Barry, pulling him close. "The levee, Roddy," she said to Dad. "The levee broke?" Barry asked, picturing the industrial canal. The canal was 5 miles long and very deep. Was all that water pouring into their neighborhood? Mom and Dad seemed frozen, staring at the rising water. Panic boiled up inside Barry. "What will happen?" Barry asked. "What will we do? What?" His voice trailed off. He wasn't even sure he wanted to know the answers to his questions. They all stood there, huddled together, watching the water move up the stairs. "We need to get up to the attic," Dad said. "Now." Dad pulled open the hatch in the ceiling, and a blast of hot air came down. Barry had been up there only once in his life. It was a tiny space, dark and hot like an oven, with a ceiling that sloped down so you couldn't stand up straight. Cleo started to cry. "No!" she yelled. She tried to run away. "No, go up!" Dad caught her. "Cleo," he said. She struggled to escape, screaming and squirming. There was no way they could force her up the rickety stairs. "It's all right," Barry said, taking hold of his sister's hand. "No, no," she insisted. "Clee," he said, working hard to keep his voice steady. A Kivo might be up there." Cleo sniffed. She let Barry pick her up and put her arms around his neck. She buried her head in his chest. She still felt feverish. He held her more tightly. Dad sent Mom up first. Then Barry put Cleo on the ladder and climbed up right behind her. Dad came up last, and they all sat down together in the darkness. There was barely enough room for the 4 of them, and they were squashed together. The air was so hot it burned Barry's lungs. It stunk like mildew and dust. He tried not to imagine what was happening just below the attic floor. Every single thing they owned, their furniture, Cleo's toys, Mom's cookbooks, Dad's trumpet, and all his music, being covered with water. And Akivo? He was trapped in Barry's room somewhere, lost. For the past few weeks, thinking about Akivo had given Barry the feeling, a secret, happy feeling, that maybe he wasn't really the scared little kid he saw in the bathroom mirror. He and Jay had created something unique, something special. Somehow the bright colors of Barry's drawing seemed to have gotten inside him. But now the bright and powerful feeling drained away. With every minute that ticked by, Barry felt more hopeless and terrified. Cleo was whimpering again. Mom held her on her lap, rocking back and forth, singing softly to calm her. The water was rising past the 2nd floor. They could hear the whooshing and banging of furniture below. What would they do? Where could they go? Barry's whole body was shaking. His mind was spinning. And then Dad leaned in closer. I don't know if any of you have a 2-story house, but if you think about water getting all the way up to the 2nd floor, that's pretty intense. He put one hand on Barry's shoulder and the other on Mom's. "I want you to listen carefully," he said softly. "We are all together. And as long as we are all together, we are going to come through this." Even in the darkness, Barry could see Dad's eyes blazing. "Soon this will be over," Dad said. "We just have to get through the next few hours." Mom wiped away Barry's tears. "We can't stay here in the attic," Dad said. "We're going up onto the roof." Mom's eyes got wider. She swallowed. "All right," she said. "But there's no way out," Barry said. "Yes, there is," Dad said. "How?" Barry asked. "Your grandfather." Barry stared at Dad. Gramps had died 3 years earlier. Dad wasn't the kind who believed in angels flying around. What was he talking about? Dad crawled to the darkest corner of the attic. He started back with what looked like a stick. As he got closer, Barry saw what it was, an axe. Gramps always said there would be another bad storm. He kept this axe up here for 40 years, and he made sure I knew about it. It took Barry a minute to realize what Dad was going to do with that axe. "Keep your heads down," Dad said. Mom pulled Barry and Cleo to her. Dad heaved the axe over his shoulder. With a mighty swing, he smashed the blade into the ceiling. And that's the end of chapter 8. You can see the picture of the mom, Cleo and Barry all huddling close, and the dad hacking away at the ceiling of their home so that they could get out onto the roof. And so that's where we are right now. Just imagine being in that position and the water is coming up so fast, and the only way out is to get on the roof. And we'll find out what happens next and how Barry ends up in the flood waters alone. Hope y'all are doing okay.